Open Access, Setting a New Cultural Standard for Accessibility. A conversation with Carmen Papalia, December 17th, 2021. Special thanks to those who took part in the conversation. This event is part of Carmen Papalia's Mobility Device, a project supported by the City of Vancouver's Untitled Public Art Grant, Other Sites for Artists Projects, and the Canada Council for the Arts. In this conversation about creative and justice-oriented accessibility practices, non-visual social practice artist Carmen Papalia will introduce participants to his 2015 Open Access Manifesto, a conceptual framework for accessibility that moves beyond compliance-level measures with guidelines for mutual care. Papalia will share his ideas that have guided his work and advocacy over the last 10 years, including the principles of disability justice and the work of figures in the broader disability movement. Participants and those watching this recording are invited to reconsider how they approach accessibility and public engagement, to cultivate a new practice of accessibility that honors disability culture in its wholeness. This conversation is intended as a point of departure. Carmen invites folks to explore what accessibility means when approached as an ongoing creative process that is guided by community needs. Disclaimer: this presentation includes a recording of a live, unrehearsed sign language interpretation targeted to a specific audience. Interpreting services provided electronically may include errors and/or omissions due to the inherent vagaries of the internet and/or audio connections. Thank you for your understanding. Open Access, Setting a New Cultural Standard for Accessibility.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I'll just reintroduce myself. Again, my name is Sunshine Frere. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm working with Other Sites. And Carmen, do you want to just say a quick hello as well?
Yeah, I'm Carmen Papalia, and I'm an artist working with Other Sites, and pronouns are he, him, his.
Great. I will just go through a few things to help everybody in the meeting to get what they need in order for us to go forward. So we have a few things set up for you. Captions, live captions should be visible on your screen for this meeting. And if there are any, if you're not seeing them, please let me know and we can troubleshoot that. The live captioning is provided by Archer Captioning. And of course, we also have a panel for ASL interpreters in the meeting. You will find them on one of the screens if you shift between your types of views, which are a little icon in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. We also have a graphic recorder who will be taking care of this session and sharing some graphics and interpretations of this afternoon. Her name is Annalie Cornelson. And again, you can also pin Annalie's graphic recording screen up if you'd like to focus on it. We will, at a couple of points during our conversation, have a look at the graphic recording and she might give a summary. And so at that point, what I will do is something that's called a spotlight, where I'll make that visible to everyone so you can all see that screen at that time. If you do have links or other ideas that you'd like to share with the group, what you could do is email them to me and I can compile them, and then following our meeting, I could send them out to everybody. That might be a nice way to kind of use the chat function as an afterthought. Yeah. And one last thing, Other Sites really wants to thank Carmen again for reaching out and wanting to collaborate on this project and his mobility device artwork. Carmen, we had such a great pleasure working with you on Disrupting Barriers in 2018. We were so pleased when you said you wanted to potentially collaborate on a new project with us. Your recent performance of Mobility Device was so celebratory and also incredibly thought-provoking. Accessibility as an ongoing creative process guided by community feels all the more urgent this fall and winter as we trudge on amongst new COVID strains and devastating climate change events. I know these elements are felt across communities in so many different ways. Carmen, you recently shared with me that disabled communities and the resource infrastructure that individuals that provide these supports are incredibly taxed and exhausted with what is happening in the world today. And so it seems like now more than ever, interconnectivity and creative approaches are really needed to figure out new ways of being, and most importantly, new ways of being supported. So thank you again, Carmen. And yeah, I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Cool. Thank you so much, Sunshine.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Carmen speaking. I'm gonna introduce myself and give us a land acknowledgement, and then Sunshine is gonna read another land acknowledgement as well. So I'm gonna start and say that I am calling in from the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in the Hastings Sunrise neighborhood of what's colonially known as Vancouver. I was born here, and my grandparents emigrated here from Greece and Italy, and we are uninvited guests on this land. So it's a privilege to be able to talk to you today about accessibility and its intersections with how we can be in this land with its original stewards in a good way. So I, in terms of a little visual description too, I have olive skin, black hair. I get those from my mom. I have a new hat on today, a green kind of fisherman style hat, a plaid black and red shirt, blue pants, and behind me, you might be able to see part of my hat collection, although there are many other parts hidden away in this place. Talking to you from my bedroom, and I'm really pleased to be here today. And I wanted to offer also a land acknowledgement that was written by, for a few years now, I've been part of this collective called Unsettling Dramaturgy. It's a group that meets virtually. We've been meeting on Zoom before everyone started meeting on Zoom for about just over 3 years now. And it's a project by a local artist, Mia Susan Amir, and her collaborator, Delestin and George Warren. And Unsettling Dramaturgy is a space where disabled and Indigenous artists meet, and we dedicate all of our time to the process and practice of land acknowledgement and accessibility. So we think very intentionally about these things as a practice, as ongoing in practice that can change and evolve over time. And so I'm going to share with you an acknowledgement that one of our collective members, Jill Carter, wrote. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we were hosting these praxis sessions on Zoom. And Jill led one on irreconcilable spaces. And Jill teaches at the Indigenous Studies and the Drama, Theatre, and Performance Studies departments at the University of Toronto. And she wrote this statement kind of acknowledging tech's impact on land. And so she's given me the permission to share that statement here. So I'd like to share it with you. And these are the words of Jill Carter being read by Sunshine.
Zoom has erected its headquarters in San Jose, California, while Skype erected one key arm of its operations in Palo Alto, California. This is traditional territory of the Mukwekma Ohlone tribal nation. Current members of this nation are direct descendants of the many missionized tribal groups from across the region. We, who are able to connect with each other via Zoom or Skype, are deeply indebted to the Mukwekma Ohlone people, as lands and waters they continue to steward now Support the people, pipelines, and technologies that carry our breaths, our images, and words across vast distances to others. As I engage in written communication, such as this email, I personally acknowledge the debt that I have incurred and that is amassing each time I open my notebook. We are all indebted to those peoples and communities whose waters and lands have been poisoned as a result of extraction of metals, rare earth elements required to fabricate machinery through which we speak to, hear from, and view each other. We are indebted to those people whose working lives, youth, and vitality have been spent in unsafe places and intolerable conditions so that many citizens of the so-called developed world might have easy access to these related devices. As we encounter each other each day through our email accounts, our messaging apps, our virtual meeting rooms, our chat rooms, let us strive to remain mindful of the incalculable debt we owe.
Thank you, Sunshine. So Jill uses that statement as her outgoing email signature. So those are the references to this email, etc. In that statement. So I just want to make space for those considerations too that Jill puts forward there in this space. And while on the topic of accessibility in this virtual space, I want to thank everybody here who all are access workers today, our artificial intelligence as well, that is doing our automatic captioning. We have 2 forms of captioning today, live and automatic. I'm going to try to speak slowly today, being mindful that we have people interpreting here. So I just want to, acknowledge that we have many forms of interpretation going on here, including graphic recording. I consider graphic recording actually a form of access as well. So I just appreciate everyone being here, and Sunshine too, for helping me coordinate today and hold space. And I just want to say that it's often these behind the scenes negotiations that they're not often acknowledged, but they're how this work happens. So I just want to thank everybody for showing up today and helping to support this conversation. I wanted to start with, okay, so this workshop is about creative forms of accessibility. In 2015, I wrote a manifesto, 5 short paragraphs on accessibility, and it was an effort to define accessibility as I understood it, and really to describe the kind of accessibility that I want to enliven with my work and advocacy. So I'm going to start off by maybe setting the tone for our discussion by sharing the open access statement, and Sunshine will be reading that.
Open access relies on those present, what their needs are, and how they can find support with each other in their communities. It is a perpetual negotiation of trust between those who practice support as a mutual exchange. Open access is radically different than a policy that temporarily removes a barrier to participation for a group with definitive needs. It acknowledges that everyone carries a body of local knowledge and is an expert in their own right. Open access is the root system of embodied learning. It cultivates trust among those involved and enables each member to self-identify and occupy a point of orientation that centers complex embodiment. Open access disrupts the disabling conditions that limit one's agency and potential to thrive. It reimagines normalcy as a continuum of embodiments, identities, realities, and learning styles, and operates under the premise that interdependence is central to radical restructuring of power. Open access is a temporary, collectively held space where participants can find comfort in disclosing their needs and preferences with one another. It is a responsive support network that adapts as needs and available resources change.
Thank you. And so that, I really think, describes my position on the topic of accessibility, and describes sort of maybe a relationship with other people that goes beyond like sort of a compliance model for accessibility. And so I that really does, I think, describe a lot of the work that I do as an artist. I'm a non-visual social practice artist. I don't use words like blind or visually impaired to describe myself, because I feel those terms privilege visual experience. I also carry an experience of severe chronic and episodic pain that I've had since I was a kid. I spend a lot of time in hospital. And I think it's my experience being in hospital and having to advocate for myself since I was a young person that has really informed my perspective on the topic of accessibility. So I really do, I've faced the harms of the medical system and have built sort of practices for myself as a way to respond to those. So today I'm going to share a lot of examples of accessibility that I am really inspired by. I also have a, so I usually, this is very uncharacteristic in terms of the way I'm going to facilitate this workshop. I've prepared so many materials, more than we can discuss today, but I think I've gathered the things that I'm most excited about in one place, and I made a document. And maybe it's my effort to show you that there's like this big world out there that I hope you get excited about too. And Sunshine will be circulating that document after the meeting as a follow-up. And also have examples of my own work that just we can show if they come up in conversation. But I'd really like to devote a lot of our time today to discussion, and I want to talk about accessibility, talk about what excites folks here, maybe reflections on the articles that I shared as well with the materials that went out about the workshop. So, however, I did as a project with Other Sites for Artists projects, which was also had support through the city of Vancouver. I performed Mobility Device, which is a performance that I realized in 2013, where I replaced my cane with a marching band. And the marching band serves as my navigation system. I performed this, when was it? In October, maybe, in Vancouver. Cool. So I realized Mobility Device in 2013. It was when I started to think about accessibility as a creative process, and how, and at that point, I really started to think about the typical offerings that I would get as a museum visitor. Maybe a pre-recorded audio tour, or like maybe the opportunity to touch a texture sample, as like really prescriptive, and almost like it was a container for my participation, and very, very restrictive model for accessibility. And so I started to think about how accessibility could be a creative process or practice. And I started talking about this with my best friend Roselle, who's an educator in Portland, Oregon. I was living in Portland at the time, going to grad school at Portland State University, and me and Roselle just started talking about the various things I could replace my cane with, and we landed on this idea of replacing my cane with a marching band. And a few weeks later, I was telling a curator about this conversation. This was John Spiek at the Grand Central Art Center in Santa Ana, California. And I was saying, oh yeah, wouldn't it be funny if I replaced my cane with a marching band? And a week later, John emailed me and said, okay, well, I have 5 marching bands who are interested in working with you. And he called my bluff. And I was like, okay, well, I have to do this now. And ended up working with this high school marching band from Century High School in Santa Ana, California. And I think the first image here on screen, though, is from a performance on the High Line in 2019. Is that right?
Yes,
Sunshine?
that's the one.
Yeah.
That's up. Yeah.
Cool. So we are. I'm performing with the Hungry March Band here. They describe themselves as a band that would play any gig. So I got in touch with them and I said, how about this gig? And they were up for it. So I thought they would be the perfect group to collaborate with. And they'd been playing like for over 13 years. And they met on the occasion of the Mermaid Parade at Coney Island. So I ended up going to New York a few times, and each time we would have like a session in this rehearsal space in Williamsburg, and we just try to anticipate the kinds of things that I might, the scenarios that I might get into when I'm on a walk. And then they tried to respond to those situations, whether it was like, oh, I'm narrowly missing like, a pole that I'm about to run into, or I need to cross a busy street. They kind of responded to those situations with musical cues. And then when we had the various protocols for how to respond figured out, we took the operation outside and we practiced moving together until we could move as a single organism. And the collaboration, once we kind of figure out how to move together, it really is intuitive, and it feels like we are working as a single creature of some kind. So this is from 2019. This image, I believe there's a couple images from the performance in Vancouver here too.
Yeah, I've just
and this is from the performance in October with the Carnival Band, who play out of Britannia Community Center here. They're a fun group of kind of anarchist marching band. And this project, this performance was very, each performance is different of mobility device, depending on who the band is, how they practice. And I felt like this performance with the Carnival Band, I was learning to be in their band and they were learning to be in my performance, and we kind of met in the middle somewhere. And the performance ended at the Showboat stage at Kitsilano Park, where I had tap danced as a child. So I got to revisit that space there. It was a beautiful day. All right, so that's mobility device. Maybe we could stop screen sharing now.
Yep.
Sunshine. Night. So I see that there's, I don't know, 10 participants or something here. I feel like this is a small enough group where we could go around and introduce ourselves. So before we get into discussion about creative access and maybe the articles that I circulated, I'd like to just go around and maybe ask folks to introduce themselves with their name, preferred pronouns, and also maybe to just describe what your connection to the topic of accessibility is. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be, as relating to disability experience. It could be through, experience of someone being, a language minority, or someone for whom, safe and supportive space is necessary in certain situations. So really, we're really thinking of accessibility broadly and about cultural accessibility as well. So I'm just gonna open it up, and I wonder if someone feels like introducing themselves first and setting off the chain reaction.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jim Wallace, and beside me is Marnie Temple. We started Empire of Dirt residency informally a couple of years ago, and we are what I would consider to be in our infancy of developing a residency that's open and available to everyone. Go ahead.
Describe yourself.
Go ahead.
Describe.
Oh, I'm old and short. I don't prescribe to ever growing old. And
Description only.
description only. I have white spiky hair, like I maybe came through the 70s. Born in 57.
You have glasses on.
I have reading glasses on.
And he's a white male. And I'm his partner, Marnie. I am in my mid-50s. I have a cap on, black glasses. I have olive colored skin, and I'm wearing a dark shirt. We're partners, and what is common for us is considering what it means to have or to meet the needs of artists who come to the residency in an accessible way, if that's the proper language. And we've most recently had, I'm going to try to be politically correct, a non-sighted artist at our gallery. And that was quite an experience for us. And there you have it. Someone else's turn.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have one thing to add, Carmen. I have so many questions for you that we need to take outside of this meeting.
Okay.
So.
For sure. We'll get started here, and yeah, we'll see where it goes, but I'd be happy to. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, hello. It's David Beaubier here. Hi, Carmen.
Hi.
Yeah. So I am in my early 70s, actually. Long white hair, ponytail, which you can't see, dark glasses, white mustache and goatee, black sweater, pronouns he, him. So I'm a media artist, hard of hearing myself with other disabilities. I have 2 deaf children that are now adults. So I come into the conversation here, I guess, around that as a background. I've been working now about 10 years, I guess, with a project called Vibrofusion Lab, which focuses on vibration as a medium, both as a creative medium and as a medium to experience sound or music, and have projects going on across Canada and internationally. And I've met Carmen a couple of times, but I have not got to know him as well as I would like to. So thank you, Carmen, for this.
Oh, thanks for being here, David. I'm really happy that you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. End of thought.
Awesome.
Hi, this is Carly speaking. My pronouns are she, hers. I come to today, I'm an artist, so primarily trained in theater, and so as a performer and a director, and I do a lot of comedy as well, and I've done a lot of children's theater. So that's one part of me. And then the other part of me is that I'm currently training to be an ASL interpreter. So I just started that program this year. And so going forward, I want to continue in my work as an artist. And I also want to work as an interpreter and try to respectfully marry those two things. in a way that increases access, whatever that means in the arts. But just try to also acknowledge my place within, getting access to these spaces and different cultures and different experiences that are not my own lived experience. So I'm really excited about that going forward, but I also am very trepidatious about all of the mistakes I will make along the way. So I'm really grateful to be able to have these conversations, and thanks, Carmen. This is wonderful. It's lovely to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks, Carly.
This is Kay. Hello, Carmen. Hello, Sunshine. Hello, everyone. So my name is Kay Slater, Kayslater. My pronouns are they, them. I am also an uninvited guest on the same lands as Carmen and Sunshine. I am a multidisciplinary artist. I am queer and hard of hearing. And I approach accessibility, both navigating the formal art world as somebody who is hard of hearing and constantly going back and forth between being confident using the label mad or not, as well as my professional career. I work as a preparator or exhibition manager at several galleries in so-called Vancouver. And as I have developed my professional practice by incorporating accessibility early on in the installation process, it has shifted my relationship with artists and audiences from being one that is accommodation focused to being about experience and shared experience and inclusivity. And so I continue to develop that relationship. I'm very privileged to have access to Carmen in a couple of different communities where I share space. And most recently, I had also the privilege to install the show that Carmen was one of the two artists featured in Project Fireflower, which sadly I just de-installed yesterday. So I'm glad to be sharing space with you all today. Check.
Thank you, Kay. Big thanks. I might share a couple images from Project Fireflower if we have some time. Thank you.
This is Kay. Awesome. Check.
Does anybody else feel like introducing themselves?
Hi, this is Carol. I was happy to see your mobility device show in October and march around with you. I am legally blind, although I have some peripheral vision. I've been working with the CNIB and various other institutions on ideas of orientation and mobility, and thought your approach was extremely creative. I also happen to be a classical music executive for 25 years, working mostly in New York and recently now in Canada. So I feel that the auditory realm is something that could be much expanded. My ears are very big and always have been. And so I really had a great time at the mobility device presentation. And I guess I would say that I am a newcomer to the disability community, but I feel that there are general points of intersection between those of us who have, let us say, poor vision, but maybe increased other sensation experiences, the other senses. And I realize that there are lots of politics around all of these things. And again, I'm a newcomer to that. But I do feel that a way of bridging those who are fully sighted into our experience could very well reside in the auditory. And without complicating things, making them so political, I mean, I just feel like hearing is huge. And with assistive technology coming along as it is, there's a way of describing to the general public that accessibility can be a general experience and not only an exclusive experience. So that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. We can get into some of that too. Yes, all good things to bring up for conversation.
This is Kay speaking again. I apologize because I know that Carmen has a general idea of what I look like. I skated right past that. For everyone in our meeting today, I am a white person who is situated in front of a black background. I am wearing oversized black headphones. I have a black t-shirt. It has the I love you ASL hand sign in white in geometric patterns on it. And to my left, there is a large microphone that is suspended from my left. Thanks. Check.
Thanks, Kay. And I really appreciate these descriptions. Thank you. We're already developing a collective practice of description here. Thanks.
Carly speaking. I did the same. I realized. Thanks, Kay, for bringing it up. So I'm a white woman with like wispy brown, newly cut bangs. I'm wearing a primarily white sweatshirt with black stripes, and I'm in front of a black background that almost covers my window. And you can see one little piece of plant coming out from the side of my screen. That's
cool. Thanks, Carly. You know, self-description, I really like it as a way of thinking of how we want to describe ourselves and how we want to identify ourselves and what we want others to know about us. I think, you know, asking people to consider us in a certain way and feeling like you can do that in a space, there's a lot of power there. So yeah, I've definitely self-identification has been a process for me from before I was politicized as a disabled person and then till now. It's currently like I still describe myself differently in different spaces where I feel comfortable. You know, in some spaces I don't feel comfortable acknowledging my pain condition, for example, but mostly in disability-informed spaces I do. And this is just something that's recently happened for me in the last maybe 3 years, where I've become more and more comfortable because I've connected with others, other disabled folks with pain. And yeah, so I just wanted to share that as we think about the ways we describe ourselves.
Carmen, it's David here again. I just want to agree with you on that in terms of a comfort zone and how, like you, kind of in the last, more so in the last 3 or 4 years, with the way that, you know, the movement is happening in Canada, is that we have created this sort of comfort zone for people where we can share these kinds of more intimate feelings and things that we wouldn't have talked about, such as, you know, pain, or you know, any other kind of so specifically hidden disability. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And it's, for me, I suddenly, like, I've been an artist all my life, but suddenly I feel I'm part of a family where everybody understands, you know, we're all on that sort of same kind of stage to speak at sometimes, but also just a platform. We're all at that same level, and there's an understanding that's a communal understanding, and a sharing and a supporting. So I totally agree with you on that.
Thank you, David. Yes, and this is part of the way that we are able to be our full selves and not have to accept compromises that require us to mask or hide parts of ourselves or minimize parts of our experiences. Pain, we could have a pain-centered or pain-informed culture, and I just love to think about what the possibilities in that could be. I think we could develop our non-visual kind of our senses as well, and that's kind of what I make space for in my own life and my own work as well. But I do think it's an interesting time now where, and I felt this a lot actually in the spring, when the dis was happening, in opposition to Bill C-7, which is the Medical Assistance in Dying Act. I felt that I had access to that platform. There was 24-hour live streams, all collectively held, this collectively held space that was disability led, and where people were really sharing the complexity of their experiences, and recognizing that, yes, we need to take care of each other, build capacity for care that we lack because of medical ableism, because of governmental failure, because of policing, and the ways that ableism intersects with other forms of oppression. So I just want to say that the space that I really think, I mean, this space, this comfort level with disclosing or sharing aspects of my experience, I really have found that through, I would say, disability justice. And I want to name disability justice as something that's distinct from disability rights organizing. So the disability justice movement emerged in 2005, when a group of queer women of color who are disabled came together and proposed a set of principles that they called disability justice. And this was, they recognized that that they had little political power as racial, queer, disabled, and it was definitely an effort to build capacity for care within our community. So I would, this is an idea that informs my work, but I think it's only through these spaces, which really are enlivening or guided by the principles of disability justice, that I feel my whole, like I can be my whole self. So I would look at those principles if you don't know them already, but one of the founders of that movement, Mia Minga, was speaking as part of a keynote that I shared as part of this workshop. So maybe we can get into that in a little while, but I just want to just acknowledge gratitude for the movement, since I think it is our guide for how to move forward and together when we're envisioning the kinds of futures we want to live. Both, it's also a space that prioritizes the BIPOC disability experiences, and also where there's also room for non-disabled people as well. So I get a lot from those principles and what they make space for, and want to share them with you if you don't know them already. I also wanted to see if there's anyone else who wants to introduce themselves today. We're doing this in like a kind of messy sort of way, but isn't that how it is when people have different access needs? They're all in the same room.
I think that might be everybody who's joined, Carmen, just kind of going through the the list. Yeah, I think
Okay,
that's,
cool.
yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. And I guess I would love to I would like to maybe start conversation around like with a quote from the Mia Mingus piece, and I'd love for you, Sunshine, to read that quote I excerpted from that piece, and maybe we could use it as a prompt for discussion, and we can see where it goes. Mia Mingus is one of the founders of the disability justice movement, with Patty Byrne and Stacey Milburn. Mia Mingus wrote this amazing piece called Access Intimacy. It's also behind the Access is Love campaign. All things that I would recommend checking out as well.
Okay, so I will read the quote now. I don't just want technical and logistical access. I don't just want inclusion. I want liberatory access and access intimacy. I want us to not only be able to be part of spaces, but for us to be able to fully engage in spaces. I don't just want to get a seat at someone else's table. I want us to be able to build something more magnificent than a table together with our accomplices. I want us to be able to be understood and to be able to take part in principled struggle together, to be able to be human together, not just placated or politely listened to.
Yeah, so this like gestures towards or goes beyond like a compliance kind of model for accessibility. You know, the kinds of things that are maybe instituted through, you know, disability through law, that, you know, still like non-compliance is pretty widespread, but there are these few things that need to be in place. When they are, people can get into the building, great. Sometimes they can navigate around once they're there, but how do they feel when they're there? And how much power do they have? How much influence do they really have with their limited representation? So I'd like to maybe open it up for maybe some discussion on the Mia Mingus piece, or even just some ideas that quote kind of highlighted.
This is Kay. Before we actually got deep into the conversation, I had an access question around any breaks. Are we pushing through for the whole 2 hours? And if we needed to pop away, would the preference be to just pop away and then we have access to the transcript? Or will there be a scheduled break? Check.
Kay, Carmen speaking here, and in your usual fashion, you're asking the good questions when they need to be asked, and I would say maybe we could take a 5 minute, but before that, I'd love to just give space, just a couple minutes, to Annalee to give a visual description of some of the graphic recording before we go into break. And I think it's a great time for it. It's like 5 o'clock now, so.
Hi, this is Annalee. I'm not showing my video right now, but you can see my graphic recording instead, which is now pinned. Thank you so much, Sunshine. So what I've got so far is a colorful title. Open access is written so that the word open conveys a sense of openness with lines not quite meeting, followed by setting a new cultural standard for accessibility. I've loosely paraphrased the beautiful quote from Jill Carter around technological impacts and the land acknowledgement there. Flowing from there to the right, we have that quote from Mia Mingus: I want liberatory access, I want access intimacy, which is white text on black. And then a few yellow circles, golden circles connecting. Now more than ever, interconnectivity is important. Flowing from there, there is a visual for the disability justice movement with fists raised. A group of people are in the center of the image. And there's a quote there, a relationship between people that goes beyond temporary removal of barriers and beyond compliance. The words trust, mutual support, and root system of embodied learning are below that in red and peach-colored text in bold letters. Next to which we have a person saying, how we describe ourselves changes depending on where we are. What do we feel comfortable sharing and with whom? On the left side of the drawing, I have white on black text. Accessibility is a creative opportunity, with a silhouette type figure of Carmen leading his mobility device orchestra. And the quote saying, I was learning to be in their band. And that's what I have so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annalie. Okay, well, let's see what time it is. Okay, so why don't we come back at 5:15, yeah, Vancouver time. Yeah, and then we'll resume. We'll just jump for session after that. All right, folks, it's 5:15 on, at least that's what my phone says. So I'm just going to pose a question. So in that Mia Mingus quote, Mia says, talks about liberatory access. I'm wondering what that means to you, to all of you, and whether anyone could describe what liberatory access would be. And we're thinking like beyond beyond a compliance level measures. I think about accessibility that's a result of compliance as like the ground floor. So like, what is liberatory access if we look beyond the those compliance level measures?
This is Kay. So thank you for the break. So I did have I love that you actually picked this quote because I stopped and wrote it down, the section that was, I want to be able to build something more magnificent than a table together with our accomplices. But then the next line in the video is, who says that tables are the only thing? And then the crowd laughs. And this to me ties back in this larger conversation, Carmen, that you're hosting about the creative challenge, the creative approach to inclusivity, access, being human in spaces. And that from my perspective, as everyone now knows, I come from this fine arts background. I build things on the regular, and the Eurocentric nature of the white box is very hard for galleries to break free from. And so this idea of things that have to be in the gallery is such a weird thing. Like, we have these different artists that are coming in and out. We have these different bodies that are coming and visiting these different shows. Who says that a plinth has to be rectangular? Who says that the walls have to be white? Who says that we can't put things on the floor that guide people around the space? Who is saying these things? And it's ableism, but it's also like tradition and fear of being too different, of having a common vocabulary, not going so far out that you can't actually translate your message to multiple people. So I think to answer your question, part of this discussion is about rethinking our language and the labels that we put on things. So who says that tables are the only thing? What if instead it's a surface that holds something, and then all of a sudden it doesn't have to have four legs, and it doesn't have to have an opaque surface underneath it. So it's just an expansion of definitions, and also just a distillation of what's possible. Check.
Thank you, Kay. Yeah, like who says a ramp has to be just functional? Maybe, as was touched on in that Alice Shepherd piece, that interview that I shared, like accessibility can be pleasurable. It could be a creative, like an artistic form in and of itself. Does anybody have examples of that, or like what is the world that you envision, the kinds of relationships you imagine in when we think about liberatory access? Maybe especially within the arts. Like, let's think about our relationships with these institutions that very much, I say the word institution and immediately makes me think of a hospital, of a medical institution, something where care is institutionalized and is prescribed, and where there's a single track to follow. And if you can only advance if you follow the rules, or else receive penalties or
Yeah. So yeah, David here. I think I think we have to be fairly what would I say, rebellious. In terms of, I think it's really about deinstitutionalizing. It's about dismantling what is the standard. If we're speaking about the arts, obviously the classic is the square white box that really only caters to a certain elite kind of population. So does it, the questions around, does it have to be a box, does it have to be a table? I think we just have to rethink that. I think one of the, people don't traditionally like change. And I think, we followed the sort of colonialist path. And it's really kind of almost a kind of brainstorming process that we've gone through, for generations, and not sort of questioned it. And I think that's where, again, this whole movement that we're involved in, I think is so relevant in terms of questioning all of this, and coming from a practice and coming from an experience of being separate, being displaced, or those kinds of experiences. I think when I say we, of course, I talk about our community. We have a responsibility, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, to really question this and find ways of dismantling it, and maybe creating some sort of an alternative system, and maybe sort of not questioning what exists, but maybe creating something new, something that is more relevant for us. I also have, and I won't talk about it right now, but this whole interesting thing for me around access intimacy and also access aesthetics. I think those are two really fascinating areas of discussion, and that, I think, really was the generative sort of thing within our work. I think that's where it's coming from. So, I'm sure that will come up later, so I won't go on about that right now, but end of thought for me right now. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and I would say, like, a lot of the ways in which we're marginalized, like we're almost like divorced from or like separated from our culture, or knowing our culture and the possibilities of our artistry, and the ability to develop those practices and advance practice. And I would say, like, do we have to develop something new, or do we have to mainstream something we already know, which is like how we are in community with each other when in a disability-led space? Like, yeah, like I feel like we already know the ways that we need to care for each other in the ways we do when we're in community with each other. but like, you know, and I'm thinking back to my last 10 years of working as an artist, and how when I started out, I was thinking about like, how to gain access to these institutions? Like, how do I break down this wall? But at the time I was entering through the education department, and, you know, I was like, how do I get into the get recognition from the curatorial department? And I think now the question is for artists, like there's you know, disability art is receiving more attention. There's more awareness that we are here. We make art, and in various ways. And the question is, like, can an institution like provide a context in which we can actually work, and can they host us appropriately? And I think for in many cases that's a no, like, because there's no other people like us there, like to hold that space. So we're often having to advocate for ourselves, and, like, you know, do the work of the labor of access and care work for ourselves, in addition to the creative practice. So yeah, so I do think it's in community that we already have what we need. And it's like, you know, the thing that we lack is representation. And you know, we are the largest equity seeking group, and we have the least representation within the cultural sector. I mean, there's so many reasons for that. You know, I was just talking about this aspect a couple days ago with a group of people where, you know, like a lot of folks that I know who are blind and low vision, when I started studying art, I had one friend ask me, oh, so what are you studying in grad school? And I said art, and he said, no, really, what are you studying? And he was blind since birth, and he's a Paralympian who is a medalist, and he couldn't imagine a world where someone like him was an artist. And I've heard this from multiple people, like, to be creative requires vision. These are biases that we have because we prescribe to visual primacy, even as people who are non-visual.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, you know, I don't want to uphold visual etiquette as a non-visual person. I don't want to, like, have to assimilate into non-disabled culture. I want people to, as Eliza Chandler would say, like, or proposed, dwell with disability. I want people to meet me where I'm at, and you know, so we can develop some access and intimacy. Yeah.
Hi, Carmen, this is Carol, the music person.
Yes.
I'm just interested to know whether you have considered doing audio-led experiences through visual art spaces in any way.
Yeah. So I have done that in various ways, through description mostly. So I've made sound installations too, which there's various ways of implementing, like, sound in that way, and trying to, lots of my work requires participation. So I represent those experiences sometimes in the gallery. I document them, and then, like, we'll install a sound installation that represents that performance or whatever. But I think through description, one of my early projects was, I worked with the Portland Art Museum, and it was a series of tours that I've done in many places now, called See for Yourself. And it was where I just asked my friends in Portland to lead non-visual tours at the Portland Art Museum. And it was an opportunity where any visitor could come and link arms with one of my friends, shut their eyes, and then one of my friends would just take them around the museum and describe, whatever caught their eye to the visitor, in subjectively, and bring their own lens to it too, and their own, like, particular knowledge to that experience. So I think through description, actually, yeah, like, I guess that for me, that's there's an exciting possibility in description. And it's not exactly an analog for seeing, but it is like, I understand a description as being an extension of the thing that's being described. It's almost like this third space as well, and where, you know, it creates the possibility for yeah, departure, like it's a point of departure. And so I know description came up in a couple of times in those articles that I sent out too, but I'm wondering, yeah, like what folks think about accessibility as a creative form. And I definitely, you know, a couple of my friends, Bojana Cochlear and Shen Finnegan, started the Alt Text as Poetry website, and really are making a case for this, and introducing people into the practice of description. But and that's the link that I have, that I'll circulate afterwards, so you can get to know that project. But yeah, I do. I'm not really answering your question, but maybe in a way am. But yeah, like I think description is a like an interesting way to navigate a space, for me, maybe, and touch too, like a tactility. I've worked in that way too, where I've established, you know, routes for myself that I can feel my way through a space that I feel is inaccessible, like just to navigate independently, for example. I've tied red cords to things in the past, to as a temporary system of access. Yeah.
Could I ask a follow-on?
Yes.
So I was thinking more in terms of, I don't know if you're familiar with the composer Charles Ives, but Ives is an American composer from the early 20th century, and his father led a brass band in real time in his youth. But Ives' compositions actually incorporate numerous brass bands that walk through the same space in the same time. And in a way, they conflict, but in another way, they harmonize. And it's like a kind of conflagration of different musics happening all at the same time in the same space. He did that as a pioneer of American music in the early 20th century, but it creates a sort of sound matrix that's really, for those of us who can't see or can't hear well or whatever, it's a mixture of phenomena, of sensational phenomena that creates a different, like a third sense of reality, really, if you will. And I'm just wondering whether there could be a way of creating installations within museum spaces. I know many of you come from the visual arts that are universally experienced by all as complexity of sound, whatever you can hear, and visual, whatever you can ascertain, but that in any way are curated with this sort of whole body sensation idea around it.
Yeah, that there's some interesting possibilities there, for creative access, and yeah, I would love that kind of experience of a gallery, for example, or an installation that invites me in those ways. I wonder, I mean, that seems, yeah, that I wonder if there's other folks here too that have examples of like creative access, or maybe like these possibilities that could lead to a more embodied experience, within the arts, or you know, just in general. Yeah, like, are there any things that folks are excited about, or maybe researched, with that invitation to like bring examples of creative access to this space?
This is Marnie. Well, when you were talking about the power of description, I find that when I have to describe myself to you or to anyone, it there's this kind of moment of undressing, as in making us be having a common ground. And I feel like that is a great place to start a conversation between two human beings. It's really special. Maybe I'm exaggerating it, but there's this moment of I guess simplicity, like starting from nothing. I can't really explain it better than that. So I appreciate having this opportunity to speak with you on a different level. And yeah, it's just, I really feel fortunate and grateful. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And for lending yourself to that experience too, because I think it does, it requires us to like share what we want to share with somebody, and yeah, like establish that relationship based on those terms. And yeah, it's a form of access intimacy, or it could lead to access intimacy, I think. And it's a form of aesthetic access too, going back to something David brought up too. And yeah, are there thoughts about accessibility as aesthetics here? Like within the disability community, we yeah, like I would say there's so many practices. Like I was reading a lot of I was so excited to read the John Lee Clark article and to learn more about protactile, and how John describes it as something that is just it's like he said, felt, it seemed so present in the experience, and like it wasn't a mediated experience, but it was like so direct, and it was so like it was so it required interdependence, and also improvisation and closeness and trust. And yeah, I feel like there's some, yeah, just that description of Uno or the deafblind equivalent, or the protactile equivalent, I guess, was really exciting for me. It just felt like an unmediated experience almost, and I hardly have that when I'm experiencing accessibility.
David here. Yeah, so I just I'll speak just very briefly about some of the work that we do in the area of vibrotactile, and some of the kind of, yeah, it is another sort of layer, I guess you would say, of intimacy, because we work with artists from various backgrounds, including deaf, disabled, blind, low vision, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone obviously experiences the tactile in different ways and in different parts of their bodies. So, and when we think about the body, there are areas of the body that are more intimate, obviously, than others. I think, we have been exploring things like floors and in particular walls right now that are actual 12-channel walls. So you can create this whole sort of composition of 12 different channels that move around in this wall device that you can experience really over your whole body. But I think the other thing is, in terms of thinking about access and sensory access, and how we accommodate people with different body situations and experiences, and a wall in some cases doesn't fit, doesn't suit certain body types. So there's always that kind of developing a familiarity with individuals that we're working with, to provide what is best suited for them. And you know, we think about music as a language, and I really think about vibration as a language, independent in a lot of ways of music. So it's a whole other, for me, a whole other way of communicating, and as I say, you know, on different parts of the body. So you can actually communicate through fingertips, obviously, you know, when you think about Braille and language and communication, but there's so many different ways of I think with technology, and thinking about technology as an aesthetic in itself, and using technology as access, but as using it also thinking about it as an aesthetic tool or as an aesthetic medium. I think that's really critical because, you know, working digitally, the technology can actually take over. It can become this sort of wow factor. But what I experience is, again, working with either individual artists or with audiences where we're trying to create an experience for the audience as a whole through vibration. I've had, you know, people who immediately are harmed by the experience of, or react in a negative way to the experience of the tactile. So, but yeah, I think again that goes back to that interesting area of access, aesthetics and access intimacy, and how do we communicate? On what different levels do we communicate? Right? I mean, we're so conditioned to believe that you know, the voice and the visual and hearing, of course, but you know, that's overlooking so many other aspects and characteristics of the body that we really have to start being more aware of, I think. And I think those are areas where we can really open up, you know, new areas of connecting and communicating. End of thought.
Yeah, thank you, David. That reminds me of, like, you know, that point in the John Lee Clark article where he's describing, like, you know, this time in the early 2000s where, you know, a group of deafblind folks met in Seattle without interpreters, and were, you know, this language, like these conventions for communicating emerged, and Protactile was born out of those meetings. And like, what kinds of languages would we realize when we are, you know, sense making on our terms, you know? And you know, I think about, you know, local to Vancouver, the World Soundscape project that happened through Simon Fraser University in the 60s, where like a group of researchers were pulled together, 6 researchers by R. Murray Schafer, who's like an avant-garde composer, you know, and basically, you know, went out into the environment and they just documented sound and learned to listen. And through the practice, that intentional practice, a whole field of study emerged, you know, systems of measure, definitions for different phenomenon, and you know, that this is, you know, where we get the term soundscape from, some of that work, and acoustic ecology as well. And you know, what would we learn? And I guess other, you know, this was explored, this idea by one of my mentors, Georgina Klieg, you know, with her collaborator Faye Devi. She has been working with, they're both you know, blind, you know, Georgina, a writer, and Faye, an artist, and they are thinking about tactility and the various ways we can develop a critical practice of touch, and you know, and how touch can be a choreography with an object, and an encounter with an object that is unique to the person, you know, the person feeling the object, but also to the object itself. So they describe methods for and develop scores for touch, and how to engage with an object from a museum collection, that kind of, in an effort to build open space up for those kinds of investigations, those non-visual encounters with a collected art object.
This is Kay. I see the interpreters might be switching. Great, this is still Kay. One of the things that I was thinking about, and David, I'm super happy to share space with you. We actually were in a workshop with Gay Tree this past year. And when you were talking about your haptic explorations and the things that you were doing, you got me really excited, because a lot of the conversations that the museums and presentation spaces are happening around here in Vancouver are all tied to a chair. And it's not vests, it's not walls, it's not plinths, it's nothing else like that. And a lot of it is because of insurance. Oh, please. Oh, cool. Yeah, exactly.
No, go ahead. No, I'm just nodding. I'm just nodding. Okay, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and so when you think, just to bring it back to furniture, I apologize to everyone, to that table again. So it's a chair, and does the chair have arms? And how far does the cushion sink? And how tall is the seat? And can the chair be moved? And is the chair stuck in a single spot? And does the chair allow for somebody who's in a mobility device or who doesn't fit in the chair beside it to sit with them? And does it force your companions to sit in another place? All of these questions are things that I feel like they should be part of the conversation, but they involve conversations beyond a single consultant. And I feel like that's another barrier that art spaces are dealing with right now, where they bring in an access consultant, and it might be from someone who identifies or politicizes themselves as disabled or deaf or blind or hard of hearing or neurodivergent, or however they self-identify. And the work is important and good, but then it becomes monolith. It becomes the one thing that the museum uses as a definition of being accessible, rather than allowing for conversations, again, through this creative lens. And that's what's so exciting to me when Carmen talks about open access and about accessibility as a creative challenge. We're artists. Why don't we get a whole bunch of artists in the room with different experiences, and we talk about access conflict as not an unsurmountable barrier, but of ways of sharing space that are based in care, but they can conflict, that need to take turns, that maybe there is a hierarchy that needs to exist, but that it has to come from language and communication. And that's what I feel like is missing from the conversation right now, is just this acknowledgement that there is no one perfect solution. Like you could say brutalism, so that, that white box just has the one thing that has the text piece that can be translated in as many different ways into as much different audio as possible, to as many different tactile ways, but no experience is singular like that. So yeah,
and
thank you. Check.
And Kay, you have a great quote about universal accessibility, and you have some thoughts on universal accessibility too. And do you want to just say your quote, Kay? Or share it?
I don't even remember which one it was. Can you tell me?
I remember the slogan that was on the wall of Gallery Gachet years ago, and it was universal accessibility is a myth. And it was attributed to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I use it in print workshops all the time as well. Yeah, it is a myth, and it's a myth that is prevalent and stuck to walls and on signs, and is this idea that it has an aesthetic. And it's like, how can something that is a worthy goal have an aesthetic when it's not tangible, when it's not a real thing? So yeah, like, how do we explore the impossible, and not as the end of the conversation, but as the start of the conversation?
Well, we would have to embrace all intersections of experience in order to like push against that universal design, those conventions, these guidelines for accessibility, that lead to the checkbox the checkbox approach or checklist approach to accessibility, or that have become calcified over time. Like, these are the things that we can expect, and that's all, and we have to be grateful for it. We need to be making space for and understanding what an Indigenous disability experience is, what a trans disability experience is, like what the disability justice movement makes space for. It acknowledges intersectionality. It is and cross movement solidarity. I really do think that we need to be, there isn't like a norm within the disability community or beyond the disability community either. Like a norm, a norm for me is disability culture, is a diversity of experiences, ways of being, realities, identities, learning styles, some of which we haven't defined yet or put words to. Like, this is what a norm is. The standard that we always are measured against as disabled people are norms established through like Western medical tradition. So yeah, I mean, these still are informing like the ways, like for the most part, accessibility is a system that that's been handed to us, and didn't include us, except for the few, or many, who suffered the harms of isolation and being institutionalized and not having access to public life, and those who advocated for a change. But the policymakers and decision makers were not disabled. They were working in the service of, and I think this is like the time in which we need to reclaim that space of accessibility, and reclaim our own care and participation, and that's what I really think that disability justice is, in a true practice of those principles, and I see that alive in places like the downtown East Side neighborhood, where I had worked with Gallery Gachet since 2011. It's a collectively run gallery in the downtown East Side. There's a lot of service-based organizations that are also providing cultural services, and who are, their social spaces, harm reduction services, things that are life-saving, supports that aren't available through the medical system, that are not sanctioned by the government, that people are organizing for their own survival, because otherwise they wouldn't have access to them. And that's, for me, like, that's what disability justice is. Whether it's stated or not, it's people who have been alienated from the medical system, who are targeted by carceral systems, who are banding together and supporting each other. That was a big point during the disability filibuster, actually, is like one of the main instigators of that movement, Gabrielle Peters, who is a poor disabled BC resident, gave a statement after Bill C7 was passed, and said, well, this is that this is a moment in which we're recognizing that the medical system is harmful, and that we need to take our care into our own hands. And she was rallying around this idea, and she described the people with her as the bad crips, the non-compliant patients, the people who, the disabled folks who are who are not the who don't easily fit in.
Yeah, David here. You've just you've said a lot there, Carmen. I think, you know, we've been brought up to believe in stereotypes and in sort of conditioned to believe, you know, sort of generic or that there's sort of it's all black and white. There's no sort of gray areas, and we want things to be easy. So, you know, to make it easy, we define people as being certain things or ways or beings. So a person in a wheelchair, every person in a wheelchair is the same. Every blind person is the same. Every deaf person is the same. And there's no sort of, disparity or distinction within that sort of categorizing people. This generic thinking, which I often go back to, because when we're working with artists, whether they're, you know, from the disabled community or from the deaf community or from the blind community, everyone's an individual. There's no single solution. So, you know, we can come up with a vibrotactile system, but it's only for, you know, maybe one individual or a few. So, you know, we're all unique. And I mean, within the sort of predominant mainstream community, we accept that. People accept that everyone's unique. But once we sort of categorize and place, like that, you know, and there's always this thing around, you know, Indigenous communities and like, why can't they get along? They're always sort of, you know, this nation believes this thing, this nation, it's, you know, so there's always this thing within Indigenous community, but there are like hundreds of different nations of Indigenous peoples. And so, of course, there's going to be, you know, different ways of thinking, you know, likewise, within the deaf community, in particular, that I, you know, have been involved with for the longest period of time, talk about medicalization, you know, and well, we all know about that, right? I mean, it's still prevalent. You know, hearing aids are only partially covered. Cochlear implants are fully covered, and you know, we're talking $10,000-$15,000. So that's a structure, that's a, you know, part of the system that is I don't know how to dismantle that. That's a tough one. But again, I think as artists, you know, we are informers. We're inventors. I mean, we have the opportunity to work in any way that we want, you know, which is a privilege, I have to say, as an artist. And I'm very grateful for that. End of thought.
Thank you, David. And I'm just recognizing time now. And okay, I want to really quickly check in, like, do we have like an extra, just with the ASL interpreters, do we have like an extra 5 minutes past our 6 o'clock, or is that all right? Or
this is one of the interpreters, Jillian speaking. I'm able to stay a little bit longer if needed.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm just going to tie this up really quickly here. Knowing that we could talk like on and on and on about this, I'm hopefully going to be providing you with some material that will send you away with on your own journey of exploring this topic. And, you know, if you all want to chat at all, just reach out, please, and I'd be happy to. I wanted to give a minute to Annalie to describe some of the graphic recording, and then I'm gonna we're gonna do a quick closing, and we're just gonna go do a closing round and final thoughts from everybody. So like, just, you know, a word or two, not like the paragraphs. So yes, please, Annalie, if you can share some of your work over the last hour.
Yeah, well, I've stretched my canvas a number of times, so I don't know if they'll be able to cover it all, but I will do my best. So some of the key things that I've captured were mainstreaming the ways in which we care for each other, which has 3 people doing communicating pro-tactile and close together. The colors around that are gold and kind of flows into ways of sharing space based on care, a conversation. And then around that, there are some people gathered and there are lines crossing through them, which connects to making space for all intersections of experience. The section with accessibility as a creative opportunity has grown to include many other ideas of alt text as poetry, installations that could be experienced by all, with some visuals around taking in sound and touching objects. This idea of description as a third space. Crossing over to the other side of the page, we have near the section with the Guided by Disability Justice Movement, there's the conversation around plinths, white boxes, which is contained in a white box, and that concept versus fun ramps and color and touch, which is drawn as just a mass of colors and possibility with the text, what else can you imagine? We have a little section on access as aesthetics, which is all kind of in peach color, with vibration as language and touch and a figure interacting with an object. And yeah, I'll stop here in the interest of time, but thank you so much. It's been a delightful conversation.
Thank you, Annalie. And the images that Annalie has been working with, we'll be circulating those as part of the materials that go out to you, and I'll be adding image descriptions to those. And I just thank you a lot for making some space today for this conversation. And let's please continue in some other time and space. I would love to just go around and maybe have folks just like offer a word or two about like something they took away from this session today as a way of closing today. Thank you. And you could just say your name and say like.
Hey, sorry, Dave. Yeah, David. Sorry, I'll be very quick. I think the important thing to me with any of these conversations is the conversation, the sharing, meeting of new people across the country, and virtually seeing faces and hearing voices. It's inspiring and reinforcing. Yeah, end of thought.
Thank you, David.
Marnie?
Yeah. This is Marnie. I have too much to say that I could take away. So can I just be grateful and thankful for this opportunity?
Yeah, thank you, Marnie.
Sunshine speaking. I am really excited coming from an artist perspective about this idea of these points of true connectivity and understanding, just in terms of when those exciting moments happen, say the creation of Protactile, or the ways in which people who are very different find ways to see common ground and to connect and build something that isn't theirs or the other. It's something that everyone can understand and use together. That's what's gotten me thinking about a lot of different things. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunshine.
This is Kay. I am always happy to get more links from you, Carmen. I could probably follow just a page of you sharing things that you learn. And I appreciate you being the curator to the amazing network that you find yourself at the center of. So thank you. Check.
Thank you, Kay. Yet I'm not really great at social media, but yes, I will send you away with links.
Thank you.
I'm laughing with you there.
I just want to say, for my closing thought, I just want to just acknowledge that, like, for me, the exciting thing is to just like honor different ways of being in the world, some of which we might not even know yet. So I think if that's maybe one of the goals around us making accessibility happen, and for those so they can honor that those forms of access can honor different ways of being in the world, that would be ideal.
This is Carol. Thank you very much. I learned a lot.
Thank you, Carol.
This is Carly. I wrote down, David, I think you said artists as informers and inventors. And what's really stuck with me is the fact that as artists, like I got into being an artist because I value and love collaborating and playing and just like throwing something at someone else and letting them bounce something back at me. So I really circled the interdependence, connectivity, shared experience, and opportunity are the words that all kind of enmesh themselves into this beautiful, messy little ball of excitement for me.
Thanks, Carly. Did we hear from everybody?
Yeah, I think that is everybody, I think.
Okay, well, I want to thank you all, and thank you, Access Workers, and everybody who made this this space possible in these various ways. And yeah, have a good weekend, and hope you find some rest. And thanks for coming.
Open Access, Setting a New Cultural Standard for Accessibility, a conversation with Carmen Papalia, December 17th, 2021. Additional contributing voices include David Bobier, Carly Pogorati, Kay Slater, Marnie Temple and Jim Wallace, and Carol Yappel. Graphic recording by Anna Lee Cornelson, www.yourwildmind.com. Video editing and captioning provided by Cheryl Green, www.whoamiitostopit.com. Interpreting provided by ASL Interpreting Inc., asl.interpreting@telus.net. And project support provided by Kristen Lance and Sunshine Frere. Logos for City of Vancouver, other sites, and Canada Council for the Arts, www.carmenpapalia.com and www.othersites.ca.